My mom and sister went to my neighbor's house, leaving me alone in the house. It was about 4:30 and already beginning to get dark. I took that opportunity to sneak upstairs into the attic to try on some Halloween stuff. I quickly ran up the steps, knowing that if my mom came back and caught me, I would be in deep trouble. Although all the windows were shut, I felt a cold breeze pass through me, but I thought nothing of it at first because I had no past experience of paranormal phenomena. I rummaged through the bag of Halloween costumes and pulled out a witch's hat, which I tried on for size. Almost immediately, some unseen force hit the hat. I dropped the bag and quickly turned around, but found nothing against which I could have knocked the hat. As I bent down to pick up the bag, I saw the handle to the bathroom door turn and the door rapidly open. I walked cautiously into the bathroom, wondering what had caused the door to open in such a way. I suddenly had a feeling that there was another presence within the room. I looked out of the window to check if my mother and sister were still outside, and sure enough, they were. Just as I was about to turn away from the window, I saw the reflection of the cupboard door sliding open. I turned around hastily to try and see what was causing these incidents, but I wasn't quick enough to catch whatever it was. Terrified, I threw the bag back into the cupboard box and ran downstairs and out into the front garden, waiting anxiously for my mom to return home. That night, I had a nightmare about what might have followed if I'd stayed up there any longer. Evil, gleaming red eyes stared at me from the bathroom cupboard, locking me in the bathroom and causing complete havoc around the house. Several unexplainable things have happened up there since then, including self-breaking objects. But what was it besides my own equilibrium that I disturbed in that attic that evening? It was Halloween evening 1995 when Pamela and her brother were heading home on a country road near Greenbelt, Maryland. As it was darkening, Pamela reckons they were moving at about 25 to 30 miles per hour on the two-lane road, with her brother at the wheel. Suddenly appearing behind them and approaching quickly was a black vehicle with two large, round and glaringly bright headlights. Almost as quickly, the car was beside them and on the left, as if trying to pass. But Pamela says it seemed that the old black car was floating rather than riding the pavement. This old car was in the path of head-on traffic, Pamela recalls. It seemed like those other cars kept going on without interruption. My brother and I looked over inside the car, and there were 4 young teenagers, 2 young men and 2 young ladies. Strangely, they looked to be dressed in farm clothing from the 1930s or 1940s, and they all looked as white as ghosts. The young lady in the front passenger seat turned her head slowly to Pamela and her brother and smiled, then turned back. The 2 people in the back seat just stared. Then, inexplicably, the car floated past them and vanished into thin air. But that's not the end of this ghost story. In 1997, my brother and I were on the same road around the same time again coming home, Pamela says, and the same spirits appeared and repeated the same scene. In 1998, my brother was alone driving home on this road, and the same ghosts appeared again, repeating the same scenario. Maybe these teens were going out on Halloween and got into some terrible accident. They are clearly stuck on this road driving. God rest their souls. On Halloween, many people test their bravery by venturing into dark cemeteries. Sarah and her husband, who had always been fascinated by the unknown, decided to do just that on the Halloween night of 2002. It was an experience, she says, that changed her life. We chose Blood Cemetery in Mukwonago, Wisconsin, Sarah tells us. I think it goes by a different name now, but the Blood family was the first African-American family in that town, and they are buried in that cemetery near a statue of a book on a pillar. Sarah's husband used to live in that town and often heard tales of supernatural events occurring in the cemetery. This got Sarah's juices flowing, so armed with a camera, 2 flashlights, and an audio recording device, they headed into the tiny cemetery. We headed for the Blood Monument first, she says. After waiting around in vain for the Blood family to show themselves, we did a little walking around. We were about 48 feet away from the Blood Monument when something made me turn around and look back at it. I saw what appeared to be a giant blue orb. It was about the size and shape of a human head, and about that far off the ground. I didn't look long enough to make out a face, so I cannot tell you if it was truly a face or not. That's all it took for Sarah and her husband to run out of the cemetery at a speed they never imagined they could attain. Although the ground was dry, they both stumbled and tripped as they ran. Her husband said he felt as though he was being sucked into the ground, but Sarah swore it felt more like hands grabbing at her ankles and pants. At the outer edge of the cemetery, they caught their breath and gathered their courage for one more short walk around the gravestones with the audio recorder and camera. I tried to open myself up a little, and I was lured to a random area of the cemetery, says Sarah. We stood there for about 10 seconds, until I felt the sudden urge to run. I said, "Oh my God, we have to go." I started running with all my might. My husband followed. I turned and I snapped a picture of the spot we were standing. When we got back to the car, we listened to the audio. This is what we heard: the shuffling of our feet in the leaves, and then it stops.
Get out.
The voice was obviously not human, but not quite animal, Sarah is certain. It was a demon. The picture showed a whole lot of nothing, except for 2 little red eyes. High schoolers and even college students seem to love Halloween as much as little kids do. It's an opportunity to challenge their fears of the unknown and to indulge in scary pranks. Chris will never forget the Halloween of 1981 when he was enrolled at a college in his hometown. Chris and 5 or 6 of his friends decided to check out a small cemetery at the edge of campus. A rusty, worn chain-link fence encircled the few graves of past college faculty and their relatives. It wasn't long before I felt something, Chris remembers. A few minutes later, I heard the crunch and rhythm of footsteps shuffling through the leaves on the ground. Some of the others heard it too, and we all looked in the direction of the footsteps. And when we didn't see anything, we assumed it was another friend trying to scare us. They all laughed it off at first, but the sound of the footsteps continued. Every couple of minutes, Chris would look down the length of the fence. He squinted his eyes, trying to find the prankster in the dark, but he couldn't see anyone, even as the crunch of leaves got louder and closer. Then, to the left of his vision, coming from the dark edge of the woods, Chris saw it. Vague in shape, it was definitely cloaked in black head to foot, Chris says. It seemed to move in spurts of speed. And then, as though time fast forward, it would be ahead of my speed of sight, closer to me than before, until it stopped at the corner post of the fence. The figure changed shape from a thin, tall form as it turned to its left and faced the students. It was cloaked and hooded, although Chris could make out no arms nor eyes to look at for familiarity. There was no shape of feet, even though the hem of its cloak floated inches above the leaves and grass. Scared, Chris wheeled away from the whole affair, and without saying a word to his friends, ran uphill to the first lighted building he could find. I felt someone was running beside me, he says. I was relieved when I saw one of my friends. We stopped running and asked each other what we saw, and we both said the same words, saw the same vision. Since that night, I have seen my friend often, except for one occasion a couple of years after that Halloween. We have never talked about what we saw that night. Halloween often inspires people to break out their Ouija boards, even if the talking board has been sitting gathering dust on a shelf the rest of the year. Bea and her friends Ingrid, Anna, Laura, and May decide to experiment with the board one night some years ago in Bea's large house in Australia. Bea's parents were away on business, and her brother and sister were visiting an uncle in South Australia, so she and her friends had the house to themselves for a sleepover. Naturally, sleep was the last thing on their minds. Anna, who was really into seances and the paranormal, suggested playing with the Ouija board, which she brought with her. I have 2 Pomeranian dogs, Muffy, tan, and Shadow, black, says Bea, and my friend Ingrid has a white Pomeranian called Haley. Muffy, Shadow, and Haley, along with Anna's dog, Ernie, and Laura's 2 dogs, Archie and Rosie, were all in the backyard, and we hadn't heard a peep out of them for about an hour. Upstairs in Bea's bedroom, the girls arranged themselves in a circle with Anna's Ouija board in the center. They each placed 2 fingers on the planchette. Anna started by asking the board, "Is anybody there?" The board moved to yes. Then Ingrid asked, "Who?" And the board spelled out, "Gail." "Who are you?" another girl asked. Again the board spelled out only Gail. "More detail," another requested, but the board only replied, "Gail." "What's going to happen tonight?" Bea asked. "Dogs," the board spelled. "What are you going to do to our dogs?" "You'll see," replied the Ouija. Bea pushed the board aside and the girls just sat there staring at each other. The silence was soon broken by a piercing whimper from the backyard. The 5 girls jumped up and raced down the stairs, fearing for their dogs. "We flung the back door open and raced out," says Bea. "We soon discovered Laura's dog Archie whimpering in a corner. We didn't even take a second glance at any of them. We simply picked up our dogs, all of them were small ones, and ran them inside up to my room. Once we had them upstairs, we fussed around inspecting every inch of them. Laura screamed, and we rushed over to see her holding Archie, who had a burn mark on his left side in the shape of a pentagram in a circle. We spent the whole night with the dogs in our arms and vowed to burn the board the next morning. The following incident happened on Halloween night 2005. The only reason this is burned into my memory is because about 6 of us were witness to it, so it often comes up in conversations. There is a legend nearby, deep in the dark woods of an old haunted mill. The story behind it is that a family of 3 used to live there, a father, mother, and their 4-year-old son. The mother apparently went crazy and drowned her son in the pond next to the house. When the father came home from working at the mill and found his son, he attacked the mother, and the fight ended in the attic, with the mother shooting the father in the head with a rifle. It is said that she hid his body beneath the floorboards, then hung herself up in the attic. The legend suggests if you go up in the attic and call the woman degrading names, she will appear to you. So, being the bored kids that we were, my 5 friends and I piled into my little car and drove to the haunted mill. I had my digital camera and was anxious to capture images of some ghosts. I'm a bit of a skeptic too, and I'm always finding excuses for the so-called orbs in photographs, constantly insisting that they are flecks of dust, bugs, or drafts of light. The woods that the mill is settled in are always very dark, so the moonlight hardly penetrated the trees as we arrived at the old stone house. We all crept out of the car and were startled to see 2 large black horses standing in front of the house. I quickly snapped a picture of them. Then we moved around, trying to find a way in. To our dismay, the only opening was a small window through the basement. We had to get down on our hands and knees to crawl through. As I bent down, I felt someone push me from behind. I cried out and looked around to see I was in last place, and I put my hand down to catch my balance, only to cry out again as my hand caught something thorny. I looked down and saw nothing unusual. Upon examining my hand, everything looked fine. It felt like I had barbs sticking into my skin, yet I couldn't see anything. After we all squeezed in through the opening, we turned on our flashlights and began exploring the house. The walls, to our surprise, were all drywall, and we realized that the house wasn't as old as we had originally thought. Yet they were covered in graffiti, a lot of upside-down crosses and 666 signs, which didn't do much to calm our nerves. Finally, we made it up to the attic. We all huddled together in the center and held hands. Nobody wanted to shout the curses, so I, being the skeptic, and therefore the bravest, decided to take on that role. I shouted some choice words in the darkness around us, and we all held our breath, waiting. Nothing happened. We waited for about 15 minutes with no apparition of the woman's ghost. With a mixture of relief and disappointment, we turned and headed down the stairs. Somehow I got in last place again, so I turned and snapped one more picture of the empty attic. I swear to you, as my flash bounced off the walls, I saw a lone female figure standing in the back corner. Terrified, I ran down the steps after my friends. No more incidences happened, although when we got outside, the horses were nowhere to be found. I took one more picture of the house, one of the old crumbling barn, one of the pond, and one of the eerie little shack we found in the backyard. Then we once again all piled into my car and left the premises. When we got back to my friend's house, we hooked up my camera to the TV so we could sift through the pictures on a large screen. The results were creepy, to say the least. A picture of the horses captured them standing there, staring at us. Their eyes were red. Now I know that often happens to people's and animals' eyes in pictures, but it was still unsettling to look at. The rooms in the house all had millions of orbs in them. I brushed it off until we viewed the pictures of the barn, the pond, and the little shack. None of those had any orbs. Yet the picture of the house had tons of them. Weird. The attic photos showed nothing unusual, unfortunately, so nobody believed me when I said I thought I saw something. But the last picture that someone had snapped of the side of the house was the creepiest. A few orbs appeared in the air, but one orb in particular was an odd bluish-purple color, and there was the distinct outline of a skull. I have the pictures still to this day, and everyone I have shown them to all agree that they are very strange, and the skull picture, as we dubbed it, is the most chilling picture I have ever took. The weird thing is, the skull is looming directly over the place where I had snagged my hand on something, and in the following days, an odd rash appeared all over my fingers. It eventually went away, but the doctors had no idea what it was, and neither do I. Every Halloween around midnight in our living room, I see a white figure of a little boy just staring at me. This first happened in 2005, the year my mom and I first moved into our apartment. I was 10 years old and my mom was sleeping. Usually I can't sleep on Halloween because I get too scared. That year, I couldn't close my eyes without feeling someone sneaking into my room. When I first saw it was about 1 a.m., and I was just lying in my bed thinking about the Halloween that had just passed. I started to drift off. Then I felt as if someone or something was tickling my feet. So I opened my eyes, and that was when I saw him. I distinctly remember that he was all the way over by the wall. I closed my eyes, thinking that it was just my imagination, but when I opened them again, he was closer than he was before. I ran into my mom's room and told her what I saw. Of course, she didn't believe me, and she told me to go back to sleep, so I went back to my room and fell asleep. I dreamed of the boy in white all through the rest of the night, and it scared me incredibly badly. The thing about it is, as I see him every year, he gets clearer and clearer, and he also gets bigger and bigger, as if he is growing up with me. I'm 13 now, and he also looks about 13. It happened in London on October 31st, Halloween. I was making the rounds at my Halloween party looking for my 7-year-old son, and I couldn't find him. I went to his room and he wasn't there, but then I heard him laughing in the wardrobe. I opened the wardrobe, and he was the only one in there, laughing. I just thought he was doing what normal kids do, playing, until later on. The party was all over and I was cleaning up. I couldn't find my son again, so I went upstairs and checked the wardrobe. He was in there laughing again. This time I asked him what he was doing. "I'm playing with Mary," he replied. I thought this time one of the kids was in there with him, hiding, so I opened the other side of the wardrobe. There was nobody there, so I thought that he had an imaginary friend. I told him to stop talking about an imaginary friend because it's not real, and then I went downstairs to clean more. 2 hours later at 10 p.m., I'd finished cleaning up and my son was already in bed. I was tired, so I went to bed. When I went into my room, I found a message written in my lipstick on the mirror saying, "You're wrong. I am real. I am Bloody Mary." As soon as I saw this, I rushed to my son's room only to find him with bloody scratches all over his arms, legs, and face. He shouted at me, "I hate you. This wouldn't have happened if you said that she was real." It was Halloween 2004. It all happened in my cousin's house at Antipolo City, Philippines. It was a nice day, and I was so excited that I would be seeing my cousins and other relatives. I had been spending my summer months with them for years, and we have this tradition of making the most out of our time together. That day, my cousin and I went to buy music CDs and decided to grab a DVD movie so we could hang out at home watching and enjoying R&B sounds. We decided to go straight back home to my cousin's house to listen to the CDs we bought. We took the back entrance of their house leading to the second floor, where we saw her nanny and niece. My cousin decided to stay in her room for a few minutes, and as for me, I started taking the stairs down to the ground floor of the house. The ground floor part of my cousin's house had been abandoned for about 3 months. My other 2 cousins had used 2 bedrooms down there, but now they had to vacate the ground floor to reserve it for guests during special occasions only. The house itself had 3 floors, yet there are only 5 people who live in it. As I took the last step of the stairs, at the side of my eyes I saw a dark, tall shadow about 6 feet tall pass by the kitchen door at my left. I just ignored it though, since that I was more excited about listening to the CDs, and I had been seeing a lot of those shadows in the past years, so at this point I was kind of used to it. I took one of the CDs and began to play it on the stereo with just a minimal volume, just for me to relax. As I was sitting on the couch, my cousin came into the living room and turned the stereo volume up very loud. As we were enjoying the music, suddenly the volume dropped down to 0. I just stared at it, wondering how it happened. My cousin even got mad at me because she thought I was the one who lowered the volume using the remote control. I just looked at her and pointed at the remote control on the top of the stereo. Realizing that I wasn't responsible, my cousin suddenly ran upstairs, screaming, dead scared to stay in the living room. I was left alone, trying to analyze what had just happened. A few seconds after that, I ran upstairs too to check on my cousin. Surprisingly, the nanny, upon seeing me, told me that she also heard strange sounds while we were down in the living room. She explained that the sounds that she had heard upstairs were like humming frogs or crickets. After about an hour, my cousin and I went downstairs again to watch a movie, when something strange happened. While watching, we suddenly felt scared because we could hear the sounds from the previous scenes of the movie, like a long delayed echo. It seemed like something was actually trying to mimic the movie, particularly the sounds. Finally, we made up our minds to stop watching and just listen to the CDs, this time a lot louder. We also switched on all the lights on the ground floor. This time, my cousin even shouted at the ghost, "This is when I'm able to spend time with my cousin, so beat it." From there we went on enjoying the sounds and chatting with each other. During the height of our enjoyment, one of the figurines from the top of the stereo flew off and crashed on the floor. My cousin wasn't scared. In fact, she got mad because it was her mom's favorite figurine. At first we thought it was the strong vibration of the speakers that caused the figurine to fall. But there were many other items on top of the speakers, some a lot lighter than the figurine, so why just that one? Also, it didn't just fall. It was more like it was thrown. We knew we weren't welcome anymore. Something was trying to hinder us from staying in that particular part of the house. We found out that it wasn't just us who experienced weird things in that living room, but also my other cousins and most of the people who used to work there as nannies for them. These former nannies had left without a word, even without getting paid. Perhaps they were in fear of getting harmed or bothered by that same shadow entity. This experience is very dear to me, though it grows blurry with time, Satori tells us. Memory fades like breath upon a mirror, especially ones that were dim to begin with. But this is what I remember. I do not know exactly what I saw, but I do know it changed me. Satori's experience took place at an all-girls Catholic college she attended, where it was rumored there was a particular bathroom that was haunted. The girls frequently talked about the icy air in this room and of hearing and seeing strange things, and a feeling of being watched. Satori dismissed them as tall tales. One Halloween, however, Satori and her friend decided to go and talk to the spirit. They went into one of the bathroom stalls that had a bathtub because it was said to be the center of the haunting energy. My friend got into the bathtub and started feeling around, Satori says. I did too. And I felt the most amazing feeling, a tingling, like electric current coming from the walls and faucets. I was stunned, but oddly enough, not afraid. Elated was more the word. We got out of the tub, and that's when I saw it. The pale image of a young girl with dark hair and deep, sad eyes. She was wearing some kind of slip. Her wrists were cut, and her blood was dripping down the drain. She looked like me. Again, I did not feel fear, only sympathy. I think she put the razor in the soap dish, I said to my friend. I know, she answered. Suddenly, I felt this presence, this tingling warm feeling inside, like the way your arms prickle before a storm. I said to it, "Come out, don't be afraid." And the feeling got stronger. Then I said, "It's okay, we understand. You can go back." And the feeling seemed to move upward in my body until it disappeared. Then there was no more energy. When the girl stood to leave, however, Satori was stricken with an overwhelming feeling of sadness and loneliness. I knew she did not want us to leave, Satori says. I said to her gently, "I'm so sorry, but we can't help you. You need to go back now." Then I felt the sadness lift, and the room grew lighter. I felt her leave. She never returned, and no one spoke of her again. But I will never forget her. She taught me a lesson. Compassion heals all wounds, whether alive or dead.
Wow!